Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about Shadowlands Discipline Priest. From the rotation to talent builds, covenants, and soulbind selections, I've got you covered. Discipline is an incredibly fun healing spec, and seems like a solid choice for Mythic Plus, raids, and PvP. I'm going to cover the basics in this video too, so if you've already mastered Disc Priest and are just looking for a quick rundown, check the video timeline. Before I start, I just want to say that everything in this video is just my idea of what's best, from my time testing and talking to some of the best players I know. I'm sure there's going to be some choices you or other guide creators disagree with, and that's a good thing. Different setups work for different players, and the uniqueness in character setup is what makes the game fun. Let's jump right into the basics. Discipline Priest does most of its healing through atonements. These are buffs that are applied whenever you cast Shadow Mend, Power Word Shield, or Radiance. Whenever you have Atonement applied to players, half of the damage you deal with priest spells is converted into healing onto them. There is some specific cases where things work differently, but we'll cover those later. The key to Disc Priest is keeping Atonements applied to party members who need healing or are going to need healing, and consistently dealing damage to keep them healed. When your atonement healing just isn't enough, Discipline Priest has a wide variety of cooldowns to help withstand heavy damage. The key to Disc Priest is always staying ahead, using cooldowns proactively when damage is coming before you fall behind. This is why Discipline gets a reputation of being one of the harder healers, although it's extremely rewarding and powerful once you master it. Another great element of Discipline Priest is its passive damage. In dangerous fights, most other healers aren't able to squeak in the damage. Discipline, on the other hand, almost is always dealing damage to fuel its healing, so it will speed up dangerous packs or bosses when other healers often can't. Disc Priest has gained some new abilities since Battle for Azeroth, some of which are very impactful. You now have more damaging shadow abilities than ever before, with the addition of Mind Blast, Mind Seer, and Shadow Word Death. Mind Blast is a great ability to use for healing and damage, however keep in mind its mana cost is quite high, so you don't want to be using it if you think mana is a concern. Mind Seer deals uncapped AoE damage and is great for a filler on multi-target pulls. Keep in mind that only the first target of Mind Seer heals through Atonement, so it's mainly just for added damage. Shadow Word Death is a very fun spell, however the damage you deal with it does not trigger Atonement. You should generally only be using this to finish a mob or to sneak in some extra damage. Two very important utility spells have been added back as well. Power Infusion gives the target 25% haste increase for 20 seconds every 2 minutes. This is by far the most powerful addition to the Discipline kit for Mythic Plus, and alongside the Legendary, which we'll discuss later, will be a large part of your gameplay. Find Soothe reduces a target's range of detection by 10 yards. There are lots of great uses for this in Mythic Plus as well, and in Pugs especially this will be great to enable skipping certain packs. On top of these spells, there's also one new talent ability and one talent rework. Shadow Covenant and Spirit Shell are both very interesting spells to use, however, for the scope of this guide, I'm not recommending either of them for general use, so you'll have to test them out on your own time. I think the best race for Disc Priest is Goblin for Horde and either Night Elf or Human for Alliance. Goblin gets a small, passive haste buff as well as a movement ability which is extremely helpful since Priest has none. Humans gain increased secondary stats and a way to break out of stuns. Night Elf is a great racial choice for any healer because of Shadow Meld, allowing you to drop combat to get mana or escape a dangerous situation and resurrect allies. Keep in mind that race won't affect your performance very much. The difference between races is extremely small in PvE. If you want to pick a specific race just because you like the aesthetics, I would recommend that. After all, you're going to be looking at your character for many hours, and you don't want something you don't like. For stats, you want to prioritize Haste, then Crit, then Verse, and finally Mastery. Haste is a very powerful stat, however early on in the expansion, you will mostly be using high item level pieces as you gear up, so don't worry much about stat priorities until item levels are close together. Haste allows you to much more easily weave together atonements, DPS, and spot healing when necessary. Haste also allows you more spells cast during major cooldowns like Rapture. Mastery is generally a weak stat for Mythic Plus because it only affects your healing. A big benefit of Discipline Priest is that passive damage. You want your items to be working for not just your healing, but your damage as well. When it comes to trinkets, you're mainly looking for big stat bonuses as well, specifically haste. I've come to like Unbound Changeling as my #1 trinket. Changeling has a moderate uptime and is a great addition to the kit. For your second trinket, you have lots of options, depending on your preference and means to acquire them. Both PvP trinkets, badge, and insignia seem like very good options because they provide a large amount of haste and main stat. The main problem with these is that you have to PvP to get them. If that isn't your thing, I think Mana Bound Mirror, acquired from the last boss of the raid, will be a very solid choice as well. This will be a very high item level and act as a strong on-use heal in emergencies. Other notable options include the Inscrutable Quantum Device or a high DPS choice like Soul Igniter. Keep in mind that there are several good dungeon trinkets, and in order to get them at a high item level, you'll need to loot them from your weekly Great Vault. It's best to do as many Mythic Plus runs as possible each week to increase your chances of getting one of these at 226 item level. Although you won't always be using consumables, especially early on, it's a good idea to always have them ready. For weapon enchant, I think that Celestial Guidance is the best option, giving a nice int proc with a fairly good uptime. For rings and gems, prioritize haste, especially early on when your stat weights might not be ideal. There are also several enchants in Shadowlands that are not present in BFA. Fortified Leech gives stamina and leech to your cape, Eternal Intellect gives int to your bracers, and Eternal Stats gives plus 30 stats to your chest. This one might be obvious, but don't forget to grab some ethereal pomegranates from the innkeeper to restore mana in between pulls. There are several unused consumables that are handy to have as well. Spectral Flask of Power should be your default choice for Flask. Have a large supply of spiritual healing and mana potions, as well as Hidden Spirit for invisibility skips. Although you can occasionally use potions for damage, I would recommend not making a habit of it. Using damage potions lock you out of your mana or invis potions for 5 minutes, and as a disc priest, I believe having the mana potion option is better than the slight damage boost. If you insist on using potions, pairing Phantom Fire potions with Shadow Core Oil seems like the right choice. Even without the potions, I'd be using Shadow Core Oil and Mythic Plus just for the slight damage boost. As a food buff, you should use Crown Roast for the haste buff. Heavy Desolate Armor kits increase the stamina for 2 hours, so you should always keep these in your bags. I also like having a stack of drums there, although most of the time you should try and play with the Bloodlust class. As a legendary item for Mythic Plus, I think the best option is Twins of the Sun Priestess. This legendary applies Power Infusion to you whenever you use it on an ally. Although it might be tempting to use Power Infusion on yourself for the haste buff, usually it's better in the hands of a strong DPS during cooldowns, like a Paladin during Wings or a Fire Mage that's combusting. Having this legendary allows you to avoid this decision, giving you the haste buff alongside them. Because Power Infusion is a really good ability that'll be used continuously throughout the dungeon, you're going to benefit a lot from this legendary. This is the first time in the guide where we'll have an important decision for Mythic Plus that may differ from Raid. Although this legendary is great for Mythic Plus, if you're planning on progressing in Raid early, there may be a different one you want to craft first. Stay tuned to the end of the video for info on raiding choices and what to expect if you're doing Mythic Plus in a slightly different setup. For Disc Priest in Mythic Plus, I think Kyrian is the best covenant. By choosing Kyrian, you gain the class ability Boon of the Ascended. Boon is an incredibly powerful cooldown every 3 minutes. It gives you access to Ascended Nova and Ascended Blast, alongside a 50% movement increase. These abilities do immense amount of healing and damage, and can be used when you're falling behind, or simply to stay ahead. For each blast and nova you cast during the boon, you gain stacks, and at the end you explode for a burst of damage and healing based on the number of stacks you had. I'll go over exactly how you should be booning later on in the rotation section, this is just a preview. When it comes to Soulbinds, I think Pelagos is the best option. The route that I've taken is all of the left side choices, which includes 2 potencies and 2 endurance conduits. Combat Meditation is extremely powerful because it gives 30 seconds of heavy mastery. This allows you to heal for large amounts during boon, even if your stat priority doesn't favor mastery. The last row, Let Go of the Past, has been nerfed several times throughout the beta, but I think Pelagos is still the go-to. For potency conduits, the 2 standout options are Swift Penitence and Courageous Ascension. Penitence gives a nice buff to your penance, which is constantly used throughout the dungeon, and Courageous Ascension massively increases the damage you deal during Boon of the Ascended. For endurance conduits, your options here don't make a huge difference. I was using Charitable Soul alongside Translucent Image. Translucent Image turns Fade into a slight DR cooldown, which is actually pretty powerful. And Charitable Soul gives you a bit of healing every time you use Power Word Shield. Feel free to experiment with other choices in these slots later, as you can change the second to last row to Finesse and try some of those choices as well. On to talents. For Mythic Plus, this is the setup that I've been liking the most. The first row is highly contested. Schism is a great choice too, but I've been preferring Twist of Fate. Especially early on with low haste numbers, having to cast Schism every 25 seconds can add up, considering you have to do so much already, with applying dots, atonements, spot healing, and so on. If played around, you can achieve upwards of 50% uptime on Twist in a dungeon, which considering its passive is a huge boost. Solace is taken in row 3 because it has the highest mana output. As a Disc Priest in dungeons that's stacking haste, mana will be a concern. The rest of the choices are pretty straightforward. Shadow Covenant was fun to play, however being locked out of emergency abilities like Purify and Rapture made it a high liability if things go wrong. Spirit Shell is mostly a raid talent, and I don't think it has a place in Mythic Plus. Now that we have the setup out of the way, we can talk a bit about gameplay. As I mentioned earlier, a big part of playing Disc Priest effectively is utilizing your cooldowns and staying ahead of the incoming damage. Rapture is your go-to for this. On a short 90-second cooldown, Rapture gives you a huge buff to your Power Word shields for 8 seconds. Remember, you actually have to target a player with Rapture, and that player gets the first boosted shield, so you can use it in emergencies as an instant quick shield as well. During Rapture, you are simply just spamming Power Word shield, and you should use it a few seconds before you know your party is going to be taking big damage. Barrier and Pain Suppression are both flat damage reduction, one for AoE and one for single target. Don't be stingy with these. Use them as much as possible throughout the dungeon. Especially if you're going into a dangerous pull, knowing that you don't have Rapture, throw down a barrier a few seconds in just to make sure that you stay stable. Power Infusion is also very strong, and you should use it when your DPS players are popping major cooldowns for the highest benefit. Using it during Warlock Infernal or a Frost Mage Icy Veins and packs will explode. In an emergency, you can also just use it randomly on someone if you need it for healing, because not only do you get the haste buff from the legendary, but you're also giving your teammates a slight damage boost to help eliminate the threat. Boon of the Ascended is an incredibly powerful cooldown if you're Kyrian, giving 10 seconds of nearly infinite healing and damage. This is great to use on large packs of enemies, but you can also use it on single target as well. The rotation during Boon is always the same, rotating between Ascended Blast and Ascended Nova. Blast will always have the higher priority, and depending on how much haste you have, you'll either use 2, 1, or 0 Novas in between each blast. Generally speaking, it's 2 Novas, however with some haste buffs active, you can alternate 1-1, and if you have like every haste buff in the game, you can actually just be using only Blast. If possible, in the seconds before you activate your boon, try to get both a proc for Twist of Fate as well as apply atonements to your entire party, with Radiance or other means. This allows you to maximize damage and healing throughout your boon. Shadow Fiend is a somewhat weak cooldown, but can still help boost some extra party healing in a pinch. Remember, the name of the game is staying ahead. The goal is to have already casted the Shadow Fiend before the damage comes out so that you can focus on healing, because pressing Shadow Fiend when your teammate's in danger is not going to save them. Outside of cooldowns, the rotation for Disc Priest is pretty fun and engaging, considering that healing and DPS are interwoven into one. The most important thing that you always have is atonements applied to your party members who need healing. For single target application, generally use Shadow Mend, and for multi-target, use Radiance. If you're moving or if there's an emergency, you can use Power Word Shield instead. Shadow Mend is preferred because it's much more mana efficient and doesn't apply Weakened Soul. Remember that if you use Power Word Shield on a target, you can't use it again on them for a short time. As for damage, Purge the Wicked is your most effective DPS per spellcast, so anytime a target is going to live for at least maybe 10 or 12 seconds, you should be applying it first. Remember that Penance will spread Purge to one more target, so when fighting a pack of multiple enemies, you can leave one without the dot and use Penance to spread it. With the Penance Conduit, it's your next highest priority ability after Purge, so use it right away when your purges are out. Mind Blast is next, however it can be mana efficient, so if you're realizing mana is becoming a concern, you may decide to omit this. Lastly is Solace, which isn't particularly high damage, but you can move it up the priority list for its mana gain if you're starting to run low. After that, you're just using Smite and Mindseer, on one target or multi-targets respectively. Smite is a pretty bad spell that doesn't provide much healing, so if you have allies who need healing, you should default to just shadow mending them if none of your larger DPS abilities are up. In the rotation section for each healer, I also want to talk about Prideful. It's going to be a big part of Mythic Plus in the first season of Shadowlands, and these things can be quite difficult to deal with. You'll find that DPS players generally want to hold cooldowns during Prideful so that they can use them with the buff, so it's important as a healer to have a strong grasp on how to heal these. As soon as the Pride spawns, try to grab a drink for a few seconds just to get some extra mana if you're below 50%. Use Radiance to keep atonements applied and focus on your DPS rotation, keeping your party above 80% health. Once the Pride starts nearing 10 stacks is when you're going to be unable to keep the party alive purely via atonements. Start abandoning Smite and instead use Shadow Mend as a filler, especially considering by now you're starting to run out of Radiance charges. After 12 stacks is when the real damage starts setting in, and you'll need to have big cooldowns planned. Barrier is great for Prideful because you can get good value as everyone is stacked together taking heavy damage. Throw out Shadow Fiend if available here as well, but don't expect it to carry you through, it's just there for a little extra juice. After that is a good time to use Rapture, and I try to always have Rapture available for Prides. Just watch the enemy forces count and hold back on using it if you know one's coming. Entering the 17 to 18 stack territory, it becomes incredibly difficult to heal as a Disc Priest. This is where you want to break out Boon of the Ascended and let your team know that they're in trouble if it doesn't die soon. Don't forget every defensive option available to you. Health potions, Kyrian File, Pain Suppression, Desperate Prayer, Fade, or anything else to live. Discipline Priest also has some pretty powerful utility that I haven't mentioned in previous sections. Shackle Undead is especially useful in Shadowlands since most of the dungeons are filled with undead mobs. You can use this as a 0 cooldown interrupt to stop casts if your team doesn't have anything else available. Leap of Faith is another invaluable spell that can be used to save people from something no other healer can, standing in bad. Be careful not to grief your team though, save it for emergencies since the cooldown is 90 seconds. Mass Dispel is helpful for dealing with large amounts of magic debuffs. Now in Mythic Plus, the Affix Bursting is a magic debuff, so Mass Dispel allows you to save your entire team from bursting nearly every trash pack. Don't forget that you can use Dispel Magic to remove individual magic buffs from the enemy as well. Shining Force knocks mobs back and applies a short slow if they're hit. It's great for displacing mobs, interrupting a cast, and also helping your tank kite. Another perk of picking Kyrian is your signature ability, Summon Steward. This little guy supplies you with Phial of Serenity, a potion that restores health and removes all diseases, poisons, curses, and bleeds. I think this is the most useful signature ability of any covenant, allowing you both an extra method of healing as well as the ability to remove things that you otherwise couldn't as a priest. Lastly, I want to discuss some issues that you may run into. In this guide, I outline what I think is best for Mythic Plus, but this doesn't always coincide with what's best for Raid. Right now, it's looking like the best covenant for Raid is Venthyr, and if you're seriously progressing early on, you may want to choose them instead. Venthyr gives access to Mind Games, a short cooldown burst spell that provides more consistent HPS. You'll be completely fine if you want to play Venthyr in Mythic Plus or Kyrian in Raid. Each one is slightly worse than the other. Unless you're competing at a top level, it won't matter too much. Just pick the one you prefer and switch later if you decide you don't like it. One big difference though is the legendary. Since Raid is more focused on throughput, using your legendary item to benefit your teammates via power infusion will end up as a large HPS loss compared to other Disc Priests. Right now, it's looking like you want to use Clarity of Mind. This legendary increases duration of atonements during Spirit Shell and Rapture. These abilities are critical to providing big healing during Raid and are much more useful than power infusion for HPS output. There isn't much crossover between Mythic Plus and Raid. Both legendaries are pretty junk for the other form of content. Your best bet is to craft a level 1 of each early on so you have both available to you. There are several things I wanted to include in this video but couldn't as it's already going on 20 minutes now. Some topics include UI setup, macros, weak auras, and how to acquire the various legendaries and conduits discussed in this video. I'm going to leave links to all of that stuff in the description for you guys to check out. If you have any questions, feel free to come say hi in my stream. I do my best to answer any and all questions there. That covers everything you need to know about playing Disc Priest for the first season of Shadowlands. Thanks for watching. I'm considering making a more advanced guide down the road for specific Mythic Plus tips or maybe raid healing. So if that's something you'd be interested in, let me know down in the comments what topics you think I should cover. If this video helped you, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to my channel. Happy keying!